Thanks for joining us again for another episode of News Digest. I'm joined today by Shashi Mandapaty. Shashi brings a background of procurement across a broad range of countries, broad range of industries, starting with his most recent role as CPO at Johnson & Johnson. But also, Shashi, you bring a background into CPG at Procter & Gamble, obviously a huge global company, but you've actually spent time, and a lot of your time based in Asia, navigating sort of tariffs and borders and challenges to free trade as just by definition of how your network was set up. I'm interested, we've spent some time on this talk really talking about these tariffs are moving around, what are the implications? And, I think so far we've learned this is, there's lots and lots of noise. There's lots and lots, and you don't want to be the person that's overreacted, over-engineered, because I think I've used a quote in the past, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change. We've seen a little bit of that with tariffs. Most recently, I think this weekend, we found out that at least for a couple of months, Apple won't be subjected to their tariffs of source and sourcing everything from Foxconn. So you've seen this a lot. I'm interested, how have you received this information, and what are the things you think about? How do you see this situation?
No, so John, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure having this conversation with you. John, you actually put it very well that, whenever we go through a massive change like this, there will always be those three periods, right? And the massive change is that since 1947, almost since the time that the TTP was formed, the US as the largest economy was primarily, the model was to export services, tech services and innovation-based services, and import goods. So that was the world order, and that is now changing. So as we go through that massive change, so let's say there would be a period of disengagement with the past. So that would be April 2nd was probably that moment when
Liberation Day, yeah,
was when the disengagement was announced. There would be a re-engagement. There would be re-engagement in the form of either new tariffs, new bilateral agreements, etc. That would take some time, whatever time it takes, 90 days, probably even longer. Right? And in between is the period of transition, which I read an article recently in the Axios, which called it the liminal space, right? The space where in any tribe, when you have the rite of passage, so you first disengage, you go through a transition period, and then you re-engage. So we are in that interim transition space. So as you said, this time is marked by a lot of uncertainty. And perhaps even incomplete information. That is what happens in times like this, and therefore it's important. It's important that we don't start reacting to every possible announcement that happens, because there's not much and because things might be in flux, right? And we don't want to be overreacting. That said, this is also, it's very clear that this is a time when there will be a fair bit of stress because of the asymmetry in knowledge, because of incomplete information, all of that, and therefore, what is the right approach to not be stressed? The best approach would be to step back and think of what is the perspective that we have for situations like this from the past, and what are the areas where we can go back to the basics in terms of supply chain as a function, procurement as a function, and so on, right? So I think that's the approach that is best suited for a time when going through a lot of change. So what is the perspective, right? In my opinion, I want to hear your perspective as well. My thinking is that the world has gone through similar changes in the past. So, for example, if you look at countries outside of the US, most of Central, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, even parts of Asia, even in the last 20-25 years, have seen periods where there is significant jolts to the commerce that they went through. Now, of course, for a large country like US going through it, will have a significant impact. I'm not trying to belittle it, but I think there are parts of the world have gone through this many times, and therefore we can learn from, okay, how is it that those regions dealt with it, and what are the learnings that we can have, and be prepared as we go forward.
I do think it's interesting. And for those of us that have been based in the United States, grew up in supply chain and procurement in the United States, we've sort of been spoiled with this idea of free trade, bilateral trade agreements, and free trade agreements that have allowed us to have remarkable levels of flexibility that, to be honest, the rest of the world just doesn't enjoy. And so maybe there's an opportunity for us to go to school, to your point, on what other people have done historically. How have they built resilience? How have they engineered around tariffs? And to your point, how do they navigate the three phases? Let's pull back without overreacting. Let's see where this turns out, and then let's re-engage in a way that's thoughtful and can potentially give us advantage. So tell me about some of your experiences in that, because I think that's been the interesting part.
Yeah. So John, I think I mean, there are many things that we can talk about, but I think that the top three areas of focus, right, typically in situations like these, is what I would call out. I think the first one is now, granted, there will always be, the moment a tariff is imposed, a widget that we were buying from country X will now cost more than what it costed till yesterday because of the tariff. But I think that, if we park that for a second, right, there are three major medium to long-term implications that happen, and there I think they are the more important changes that we need to be prepared for. I think the first one is, as we all know, currency and inflation will have a massive effect, right? Because for example, once US comes up with tariffs, it is possible, although it has not played out that way. I know that in the recent past. Again, we don't want to worry about the recent past, but the currencies from the developing markets which sell tends to devalue. Same with inflation, and so therefore, how do we as businesses react to or cope ourselves for those changes in currencies, which can be quite A, bigger in terms of impact, and B, more unpredictable. I think. So that's one change that we need to be prepared for. I think the second one is that when a large market like the US has barriers for trade, those countries where there is a significant amount of manufacturing capacity, and I'm speaking from a procurement perspective here.
Sure.
That's my specialization. Those markets where suppliers have a fair bit of capacity, there will be capacity underutilization. And it is very clear that capacity underutilization will lead to a situation where those suppliers and those countries will try to move those products into those other regions outside of the US where they have a more amenable market. So then there is a cascade of tariffs, cascade of barriers that will happen because those countries are not going to sit idle. They're going to now start raising their barriers to prevent their domestic industry from being, to protect their domestic industry. So one leads to, so this one set of barriers in one large market like the United States will lead to a number of cascading effects around the world, which we then as procurement and supply chain professionals will need to be prepared for to deal with. I think those are the two big from a commercial perspective. I think, but the most important, and I'm sure you would have covered this in some of your prior talk, but I just want to emphasize it, is that as buyers, as procurement professionals, we know that when it comes to costs, we can somehow deal with it, and we'll find many different ways to deal with costs and cost increases. But when it comes to supply issues, which means the material is not available at all, that becomes a very difficult situation to be, and we as buyers would want to make sure that we never land in that situation, because then we are not only are the costs going up, but even we may not even find the materials that we need to make whatever we want to make, right? And that risk is real. That risk is real. A, because there could be already some inventorizing or pre-ordering going on, because of which it might be tough for everybody to get the materials that they need. The second reason could be the supply lines might get disrupted, as we are hearing these days that's happening, and that is natural, that will happen. I think the third could be more systemic in the sense that some suppliers just go out of business and stop producing what we want, because the lines many times at the supplier locations are fungible. You have an injection molding line, you could do product A or product B. If you're dependent on product A and they just switch to product B, there is a capacity crunch, right? And products may not be available, raw materials may not be available that we want. So I think that is the third, that's the supply assurance side of it, which we have to be extremely careful and therefore plan proactively to prevent that from happening. So if I were to therefore look at the top three risks, it would be first would be the currency. The second is the cascading effect of
capacity. Yep.
And then the third is just making sure that we have enough supply.
So let's talk a little bit. I first of all, I appreciate the perspective, because I think many people have gotten their heads around, I need to solve for tariffs. And yeah, I see what tariffs are. I can understand via math the impact on my gross margins, and as such, I can think through the implications of that, whether I price, whether I change supply, et cetera. But to your point, tariffs are one part. Then there's the currency fluctuation. I mean, you could argue a strong dollar makes up for any tariff problems we could experience. Now, to your point, that isn't necessarily where the model goes. You have to have some insight and be able to play that.
Yeah.
The idea of the shifting land and makes any type of problem makes strange bedfellows, and you might find that capacity you thought was there is no longer there. You might find that capacity now exists in places you hadn't thought through, which allows for you to navigate through. And then I think this underlying of, look, at no matter what, supply chains are good at navigating cost. What you can't do is make a widget that hasn't been made. And so the idea of ensuring the integrity of supply, not only in the integrity of supply, but high quality supply, such that it works through in your product, whatever that product might be. But it requires a certain amount of visibility. I mean, understanding how the five-dimensional chess works means that you understand not only where you're getting where your primary suppliers are, which some companies struggle with, but what's the secondary supply, what's the tertiary suppliers, and how does that play through? Did you enjoy that kind of visibility and understanding, and could you analyze it, or does it now beg a level of visibility and technology that you didn't have and you wished you did?
I think that's an area where it has never been perfect. In some industries, we have a little bit more visibility. We call it N-tier visibility. So we have tier 1, tier 2. So suppliers, and their suppliers, all the way up to a mine or a farm is the ideal situation, right? That we should know. But that is not the case. It is never ideal. For some of our materials, some of our products, we have more visibility than the others. Also, industry-wise, I think the auto industry is a little bit ahead.
Sure.
CPG still is ahead, and others are behind, right, in terms of having this end-to-end visibility. But the reality is that now with this new world, it is important that everyone establishes the right level of end-to-end visibility beyond the four walls of your of our organizations. So visibility is important, but I think the next question would be the so what. So I know that there is this visibility. I know that there is this supplier. I know that there is this potential risk. How do I then turn that into an action? So which means, how agile are my supply networks, right? So do I have specifications that are general enough to be able to move from supplier A in country A to supplier B in some other country? Many times we may have our internal requirements, our specs might be defined so narrowly that it's difficult for us to switch. So in which case, even if we have the visibility, there is not
do anything. Can't action the implications.
Right? So specs is one area. The second is, of course, regulatory approval. So it's not in many industries, it's not possible to just switch from one material to another material, or from one supplier to another supplier without the right levels of regulatory approval. So getting those in place. I think there is also this third aspect, which is internal processes that are needed to make sure that we can onboard. This is for non-raw material categories. So there are certain other categories where how do we make sure that we can bring in suppliers faster into our ecosystem than what we could in the past. I think these are some of the things that, as organizations, I think if we use this time, it would be a very good use of our time to sort of build the visibility, build some of these infrastructure, I would call it, to make sure that we are a little bit more agile than what we were in the past in terms of our ability to switch suppliers and switch networks, and at the same time improve our internal processes to be able to onboard new suppliers.
I couldn't agree with you more. I used to say that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and everybody's mind is focused on this. It allows for you to think about, how can I build, how can I afford, how can I justify the investment, the engineering, the capabilities I need in order to navigate this. But you can't do it when the waters are calm. Nobody remembers, when this storm ends, nobody will remember, and they'll want this to be business as usual. You need to always, as a supply chain leader, use these opportunities to build what it is will be necessary. This isn't the first time of disruption we've seen. We've seen these kinds of things in the past. This is just a different flavor. You could argue the scale, certainly to some industries, is remarkable and different. But I think we've also seen, as the dust has settled a little bit, potentially this is just the opening foray into discussing trade agreements and new trade balances, et cetera. So not overreacting is an opportunity for us. I think your idea of understanding that this isn't simply a tariff engineering game, it becomes a where does the currency go, where does the capacity go, and then how do you ensure supply, leads you to, as we've talked about, and I think you've so beautifully said, I need visibility. I need to have agility within my product engineering. I need a product engineer for reliability and resilience so that I can have several different sources potentially as the world changes around me. But those are changes and those are investments you need to make during the most critical times, because it's hard to get your head around doing them as when the dust settles, if you will.
Actually, John, I would say that there are two. I mean, I know in this whole thing, I keep saying that there are two. There's good news here as well for the supply chain function and for procurement as a function. And I think the two pieces of good news is that your point, the value case that is needed to build resilience into our supply chain, with tariffs will become stronger. So in the sense that now there is a very clear financial basis that, hey, invest the resources that you need to invest on the engineering, on the quality, on the new qualifications, on getting the new regulatory approvals, etc. Earlier, it was seen as almost like an insurance and nice to have.
Yes.
Now there is a very strong dollar value case that you can put behind it and actually make your supply chains more robust, more resilient, right? That's one. I think also there is the value case for technology, particularly robotics. Okay, will become a lot easier, right? I mean, if you're looking at, for example, reindustrialization of the United States, it's not going to be with the same level of manpower and all of that, right? And if they set up a plant here, if a supplier sets up a plant here, they would look to invest in robotics and automation and all of that. Earlier, the value case for that would be, hey, I invest X dollars in robotics, and the base case is a plant in Vietnam or in India,
correct,
or Bangladesh, right? Versus that, now the value case would be, hey, either I invest in people here in the US or I invest in automation. So I think it's a good opportunity to make our and I talk about it more from the point of view of suppliers' plants, right? And I think we'll see more of automation and more of robotics coming into play as we deal with this the situation, which in the long run is
the right answer. I mean, it is where the world has to go. And I agree with you, and I appreciate how we're starting, as we've rolled around in this a little bit, to understand that what may have seemed like doomsday in our 3-4 weeks ago as we were trying to navigate through this can lead us into a place where we can figure it out, and it can lead to progress. I love your point around, I now have a real base case to take to my CFO and say, these are the costs we're actually experiencing. This isn't potential insurance or cost avoidance. This is what we really saw last month, and that allows us a different thing. It allows us to have a very different discussion with our suppliers and talking about they're committing to automation and how we feel about that. These green shoots, if you will take us into a place that maybe is much more tangible, much more real, and to your point, easier to justify and get some passion and urgency around getting there.
So.
Well, Shashi, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for your perspective. It's been a terrific moment with you. I think that the world will continue to change. We have to continue to sort of, I liked your thought, get back to base case, get back to what we're good at. And I think the theme, your point of, we know how to navigate costs. Let's figure out how to ensure supply, and then we'll figure out how to navigate costs, I think is a one for all of us to remember. So if you've enjoyed today, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Take the opportunity to like this video and also subscribe. There's going to be more thoughts like this with experts like Shashi. We are happy to share it with you. And if you have comments, we do read our comments and look forward to that dialogue with you as well.
Thank you very much, John. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Shashi. I enjoyed it.